Let's be for real, for no fault of its own, this series is launching at a rough time for it because it's coming on the heels of a literal global phenomenon. Hello pigeons, welcome back. In this episode of C is Horny on Main, we are going to talk about the off-campus Prime Video series, the final trailer for which has just launched before the series itself comes out in mid next month in May 2026. Why do I want to talk about this? Well, at this point, smut and its defense is a core pillar of the Chaos brand. Also, I talk about books, I talk about TV, I talk about what I read, what I like, and I've been talking about being excited for this series for a while. So when the trailer dropped, not unlike the trailer drop for Bridgerton, I wanted to see what it was. I wanted to see what the vibe was. I wanted to check in on my own feelings about this and again, re-romance more broadly, because romance is having a moment in media. Not that it's ever far away from, media attention, but it's kind of being centered for the first time in a while. And I really appreciate that, and I think it's important. So to center the off-campus series a little bit and what's going on more broadly, there's a weird split screen sort of thing that I find that's happening in the field of popular romantic, not just comedy, but popular romance. We've got on the one side the mass market romance paperback book to TV or movie adaptation pipeline, which has always existed. It has always been with us, and it's always been kind of mid. Elsewhere, we've got the new properties, we've got the more mature takes, or the attempts to be mature take, the darker sort of themes, the drama, Pillion, Wuthering Heights. Hoo boy. Like I said, attempts to be dark. But that kind of counteracts or contrasts with the current crop of things like People We Meet on Vacation, You, Me, and Tuscany, more recently, I think, My Oxford Year. Like, these are both romance, but one is very kind of solidly in the popular mass market appeal rom-com. The other one is trying to do something different, right? So the question for me, genuinely, as a media watcher, as someone who's interested in media trends, is where is this series going to sit within the canon? Within the genres and the subgenres, within its approach to the media, within its approach to the things that are staples of romance, like tropes, chemistry, world building, character delivery, etc., etc. And what is it going to be compared to? And are those comparisons going to be fair? Like I alluded to at the start, the real challenge for me is this series is going to be compared, whether or not it wants to be, with Heated Rivalry. But that kind of makes sense to me. Both of them are based on mass market appeal, paperback romance series by two very popular authors, both within their subgenres of these kinds of books. The other thing that I think it's going to be compared to for timing, and because it is also descended from a series of the same kind of books, albeit a historical genre, is Bridgerton. Again, for better and for worse, these are the collection, the constellation of properties that this series is going to be coming out and facing the audience to. So, what's it going to be up against? I'd argue that I don't want to downplay it, okay? I don't want to dismiss the value of rom-coms. They're satisfying, they're fun for a lot of people. They're not my preferred kind of medium. I don't tend to gravitate towards those stories, and it's not because I'm too good for them or anything. They don't tend to intrigue me or interest me. If I want to enjoy a romance, I prefer it in a book than I do to a rom-com. I find the books more satisfying. And I think that's because, as we have discussed at length, there are certain things that you can only do in certain mediums. One of the challenges in adapting any kind of romance story is, unless it's incredibly action or plot driven or what have you, most, traditional book-based romances tend to be very internal. They are about feelings. They are about a personal journey. And those are not always easy things to adapt to and convey on the screen without the benefit of very, very strong external story beats, surrounding plot devices, etc., etc. Part of the reason he did Rivalry was the genuine success that it was is because Jacob Tierney did a masterful job of adapting a book based so much on the internal worlds of these two characters. And, you know, with the right production team and ferociously talented actors, brought the internal world and internal struggles of its main characters to life so deftly. I've said it before, I will say it again. Jacob Tierney and co. set a gold standard, I would argue, in book adaptations, period, regardless of genre in what they did. Bridgerton, to contrast, I would argue, is also an example of a good adaptation, but not necessarily a faithful adaptation in the same way. It took the things that mass market paperback appeals to so many people, you know, the tropes, not to say the campiness in some cases, but the sweetness of it all. And yes, of course, the spice. We will talk about the spice. I mean, do you know me at all? But it gave us something new. It leaned into the tropiness of romance, but it gave us enough twists through the world building and the aesthetic and the design choices to make it very, very compelling and interesting and fun to watch. I'd argue that most mass market rom-coms made for streaming or TV kind of movies these days don't have either the writing savant of Jacob Tierney or, frankly, the narrative storytelling and production values and levels and intensity of Shondaland. And just to be abundantly clear, Off Campus is going to be an Amazon MGM production. Is an Amazon MGM production, sorry. Like, it's filmed, it's shot, it's edited, it's coming out. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we've seen this kind of scripted adaptation to series done through this studio yet. Tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. I mean, it's perfectly possible that I just haven't, you know, tuned into it, whatever. But most of the time when I think of books written for the female gaze that have been turned into series in recent years, a lot of them are pretty dark. My favorite one was probably Sharp Objects, the adaptation of the Gillian Flynn novel that was done by HBO. It is sinister as hell. I love it. It's so good. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. But that's not what this is. It's not this mass market paperback appeal, right? This is a different property. And you have to remember, as far as production goes, that these things would have been, the rights to the books would have been bought and negotiated years ago. Production would have begun years ago. Casting, writing, all kinds of decisions. We're seeing the end result of decisions that were taken months and months and years ago. So the fact that everything is coming out when it is something of a mistake of timing and fate. But again, I think speaks to this trend towards centering romance more in broader pop culture. So here we are. I've spent a lot of time in previous videos debating the value of romance because, again, it is a genre of fiction that tends to focus on the internal world and through which intimacy of all kinds, not just sex, but including sex, is one of many ways that the main characters learn to communicate, move through the world, build relationships with other people. I think that's good. So to be spoilery, and again, if you are going into this series blind and you want to go into it blind, stop watching, come back after, the premiere, come back and hang out with me then. But I am going to talk about the book series because that is the only piece of property that we actually have in our hands right now. I happen to like the Off-Campus series. It's not perfect. It is something of an example of its time. Just as there are trends in anything else, there are trends in literature. Things come into and out of vogue. Language changes in pop culture. I'm not saying, that we excuse bad behaviors or actions, but I am saying that a lot of a lot of kids today, like the legit bodice rippers of the 80s and 90s, would put them in a coma if they saw some of the shit that we were reading back then. Whew! Like one of the OG bodice rippers is called The Flame and the Flower, and I don't even think I can talk about the main plot points without being flagged on YouTube. But like the premise is that our main hero, our main male character, thinks that the female main character is a sex worker when she isn't. Events ensue. And this is put forward as being a great romance. My point is we've moved on from that, right? And things like pop culture's versions of fantasy and fantastical change. There are trends in what comes into and out of vogue sexually as well as in media. Like there is a whole conversation to be had about how does and does not influence those kinds of things, right? Let's just, again, this is a spice, positive space, people. I'm assuming everybody who's hanging out here is mature enough to handle that, which actually leads me on to something really interesting. So, like I said, I like the off-campus series. I would never claim that they are great literature, just as I would not necessarily claim that Heated Rivalry is great literature, but that they are solid examples of a trope-heavy, popular genre of fiction, which is new adult romance. Some terminology here. Young adult is an actual age in terms of publication, in terms of audience building. Put a pin in that. New adult very much is college age and up, like into early mid-20s. That's the kind of age of the intended, not the intended audience, but the narrative devices tend to take place within that time frame of life. And when you think about it, that is a time of life where a lot of big things happen to people. It makes sense for me that this exists as a narrative subgenre in its own right, because there's a lot of drama that happens in that period of most lives, and it makes sense for people to do popular fiction about it. Spoiler warning, I'm going to be talking about the content of the books. We don't know what's in the TV series yet. We do not know what plot points or characters or what have you are or not going to be absorbed in a TV adaptation. And as I've said before, I believe that adaptations have to stand on their own merits. So I will not be upset if things change from the books. The question will be what changes are made, how well they're executed, and how they hold up, right? Let's talk about that in a month. Why do I like the off-campus series? Well, because as I've talked about, romance isn't just smut. Like, that's fun, and it's hopefully well written and interestingly done and actually adds something to the story. But good romance is about human interpersonal relationships and human personal development of some variety, generally. Like, characters have to go through a narrative arc of some point. Tropes are usually the setup narrative devices, and, the story beats themselves might be recognizable or even, predictable. The joy and the pleasure is in how the story delivers on those expected beats in ways that feel authentic to the characters, to the voices, and to the circumstances. Cool. In the off-campus series, in addition, to the actual romantic relationships, I like that the books tackle peripheral issues that add character, add flavor, add stakes to the world building. A non-exhaustive list of what is included in this is abusive family members, both physically and emotionally. Poverty is a main theme in some of the books. Wealth is a main theme in some of the other books. One of the books goes really into the cost of addiction within one's family and how that impacts other members of that family. A little bit more heavy, one of these books actually tackles sexual assault and its impact. And in that particular case, I actually don't mind the tropiness of that because it informs the character and it's also something that is incidental to the character's journey. No, that's not even true. It's a rare example I find in popular literature or popular media of all kind where a past sex assault impacts a character but doesn't define them or isn't used gratuitously. It's one of the better examples of, I would say, successfully moving past a past trauma that I've seen portrayed in a pop media book. Like, I'm not saying that it is going to win any awards for therapy. I'm not saying it delves into the darkness, but I do like seeing portrayals of people who have come out of the other side of some things better and stronger. I know this is a tricky thing to say. I'm probably not even articulating myself as well as I would wish, but I like every once in a while in, the Game of Thrones world that we live in, I like seeing examples where an assault is a thing that has happened and a person has successfully overcome and moved on their life on their terms past it. Does that make sense? Another thing that I like about the Off-Campus series, and again, about this kind of subgenre of romance literature, is you see a range of sexual experience. Like, yes, we have some stereotypical, virginal heroines, but we also have really, really experienced heroines, especially. It's something you don't always see. I think a lot of people assume that the virginal heroine is still the standard in romance media, and it's not, babes. The girls are doing better. And I like the fact that this series has characters of all different levels of experience, different levels of exploration, and again, when done well, the exploration and the experience building is intrinsic to their personal and relational development with other characters. That's how, sex and sexuality becomes a narrative plot point and not some gratuitous incidental side bit. For what it's worth, it doesn't exist in this series, but one thing that I've also liked seeing in a lot of new adult romance fiction of recent years is there have been better examples and more well-written examples, I think, of virginal male characters, because, we all gotta lose it at some point, right? Like, the idea, the trope of the man always being the most experienced partner is just not an accurate representation anymore. And romance is one of the genres that I think portrays that well, accurately, and positively. Also, it's fun. I don't know if it's because it's when I first read this series, but I like a lot of Elle Kennedy's writing. Not all of it, but I do like the Off-Campus series. I like how she writes banter and dialogue. I think she does a pretty good job of making each character very, very standalone, self-contained. Like, she writes characters well, and she writes relational characters really well. I feel, because I am familiar with the series, like I know what I'm getting into, I know what I expect from this series, but I'm also hoping to be pleasantly surprised in some way by an adaptation which takes these stories and puts them into a different medium. As far as we can tell from the trailer, that's been dropped. This series is going to be based on the first book, which is called The Deal, and is about Garrett Graham and Hannah Wellesley. The trope you can expect is the fake dating trope. This is made very clear in the trailer, like that's not a spoiler. But there are other tropes that, again, we'll chat more after the series drops in a couple of weeks. But yeah, fake dating trope. This is an example of both characters having romantic and intimate experience separate from one another before they are thrown together, and how they do and don't find each other. I won't tell you what the surrounding baggage for those characters are. You can find out for yourselves. But I am curious to see how the show is going to tackle them, because as I mentioned in that, list, the side quests, if you will, do deal with some, rougher stuff. And I'm curious to see how, a popular studio adapting a popular series for a presumably large audience on, Prime is going to tackle that. It could go really well, and it could go really badly. Which brings me to the trailer. When the trailer came out, my first thought was, oh no, I'm not sure this is going to be for me. And by that, I mean that I wasn't sure that I was going to be the intended audience for this. And that's very interesting. The vibe I got from the trailer was not new adult, you know, that kind of age bracket that I mentioned as part of the publishing genre, but it reminded me a lot more, quite literally, of young adult. Like for some reason, I can't tell if it's the glossiness of the production value, because it does look like, you know, money was spent in good ways, but there was a slickness to it, even a color grading reminder for me. It tickled something in my brain. And I had to watch the trailer a couple of times before I went, this weirdly reminds me of OG WB, right? I have no idea what the state of American TV is anymore, but back in my day, you know, the glossy, high-produced, you know, angsty teen young adult series on the WB, the Gossip Girls, the early DC, you know, cinematic universe, Smallvilles or what have you. There was a whole genre of this kind of show. And that was the vibe that I got from the trailer. And that worries me. And I couldn't tell, like, why did it feel this way? Was I wrong in that? And why did that feel off to me? And it wasn't until, like, I saw the actual website for the show and I saw the label on it, and it literally read young adult audience. And let's be blunt, that's what the WB shows kind of my youth were geared towards. I'm not saying that, you know, grown adults didn't like them. I'm not saying a bunch of grown adults my age, you know, still don't look back on some of those shows very fondly. But the shows of that time period were written, edited, shot, and shown on, you know, publicly available TV for certain age audiences. The writing had to reflect, you know, whatever restrictions did or didn't come from being on the mediums that they were. The depth of the writing or of the acting was tailored to that kind of audience. Not to say that young adults aren't sophisticated. Again, I'll come back to that. But like, when young adult is the audience, the core audience that you are creating for and catering to, that is going to inform a host of choices, from the costuming to the production to, most importantly, the writing. And that worries me a little. I was trying to parse why this worries me. Because, again, theoretically, young adult, new adult, there is crossover there, right? In age cohorts, broadly speaking. So why did this feel so weird? And I think it's because when you think of the romance genre, you know, in all of its, you know, multi-billion-dollar breadth, it is read by a wide range of people in terms of age demographic, right? Teenagers read it, and, you know, people like elderly women read it. And I am talking about women here. We know men read it. Like, I'm not going into that. It is mostly a female gaze coded genre. And that is a huge bracket, you know, teenager to old age pensioner. But I'd argue that TV isn't really made for those kinds of demographics, right? TV is sliced and diced for more clearly defined age groups, in some cases with clearly defined labeling restrictions and, you know, who can see what, you know, PG-13 versus R ratings. Like, is this on cable, you know, where you have to pay to access it, or is it on public television? Like, there's all kinds of layers and restrictions on age that don't exist in the same way it does for something like a book, where the only real barrier to entry is probably going to be reading comprehension. There is a side quest to be had here about appropriateness, and it's not really what I want to get into, because I'm nearly 40 years old and I don't have children, so I don't have to think about these things, and I like my life. In briefest summary, the first video I ever did on romance and smut, I kind of touched on this. I do think that there are different ages of appropriateness for different kinds of material. I do think that, you know, someone who's 13 might not be able or should be able to read or watch something that a 16 or 17-year-old could, but I I'm not a parent, so I don't have to worry about these things, and I'm old enough that I get to enjoy whatever I want. My point is that that's not an irrelevant conversation, but it's not the conversation I want to have so much as I want to talk about, audience construction based on age groups, right? The romance genre in books is constructed specifically to be as broadly appealing as possible, and your only real barrier to entry is your literacy. TV is different. There are more restrictions in place on what can be made, who can see it, when they can see it, how many F-bombs you can drop, probably how much nudity you can show. Fine. But when you think about it, the romance book genre, at least open door romance, is explicit. It is explicit about sex and sexuality to differing degrees, what have you, in ways that TV for young adult audiences isn't. Now, this isn't to say that we don't have sex on TV that is seen at all different kinds of ages, some of them too young, or at least without certain layers of appropriate or informational context, right? Again, I'm not a parent, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. But let's look at Heated Rivalry again. Heated Rivalry is, at least the first book, and the first half of the show, is a new adult aged book in the sense that the main characters are late teenagers into their early 20s. If Off Campus is college age, this is college age too. The boys just didn't go to college, right? But we're dealing with the same age groups of people. Heated Rivalry, however, I would argue, was not written for the young adult audience gaze. Again, that's not to say that I think that young adults can't or shouldn't watch it. I think it is genuinely no more explicit than a lot of things on Netflix. The only difference is that, it's two men, where you often see men and women, and that's going to make people uncomfortable because of homophobia. But in terms of what we actually see on the screen, simulated on the screen, it is not more explicit than, what we see on Netflix. I just have to emphasize though, even though the age cohorts are the same, there was nothing about the writing of Heated Rivalry, the production of Heated Rivalry, or I would say the gaze around which Heated Rivalry was built that felt like a young adult audience. And I think that's partially why it was so successful. Jacob Tierney famously treated his subject matter very, very seriously. He knows that romance is a mass market appeal genre. He knows that this is not highbrow literature that he's adapting. That wasn't the point though. The point was he fell in love with the story and the characters, and he wanted to portray them really, really authentically. He brought a genuinely adult, mature, in a non-sexual sense, approach to his TV making that I think really elevated that series. It wasn't made for teenagers. It could be enjoyed, in my opinion, by a lot of teenagers, but it wasn't limited, because it wasn't made just for teenagers or just for adults. It was just made to be good TV. Whereas my major fear going into the Off-Campus series, having seen the trailer now, having seen how it's badged, just having seen, the vibes that I'm getting already, I'm worried that it's going to have been made specifically for a young adult audience, which will leave nearly 40-something-year-old women like me a little bit on the sidelines. Does that mean I won't watch it? Absolutely not. I'm really looking forward to it. I've decided to remain cautiously optimistic that because we're living in something of a golden age of romance, that it's going to be treated seriously as a subject matter, that, Elle Kennedy, her character crafting and her world crafting is going to be respected. I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. I'm genuinely looking forward to it. I really, really hope it's good. But from the marketing alone, at the very earliest outset, the biggest risk that I see is that Jacob Tierney understood the assignment, which was that romance was for anyone of a certain degree of media literacy to enjoy and engage with as a piece of storytelling. Whereas if the labeling on Prime is anything to go by, Off Campus might have been crafted for a specific audience, which in my opinion could blunt its appeal. I don't even know if I'm explaining myself correctly. I want romance to be more accessible to more people. I've talked about this before in my Heated Rivalry videos. I talked about it in my How I Learned to Love Smut OG video. I think romance teaches people how to be in relationships. It done well, it is just good storytelling. It is good interpersonal storytelling about how people overcome communications barriers, emotional barriers, circumstances, and choose to, partner with other people. And I think that's good. I think those kinds of stories deserve to be told. I like that we're dealing with them more complexly than the average rom-com, which in my opinion often leans so heavily on tropes to the detriment of actual narrative storytelling. I am so thrilled that we have something like Heated Rivalry to be a standard bearer. I'm a little bit nervous that things that I want to see done well will not be done as well, but yeah, Jacob and Co, boy, they set that bar high. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts on the Amazon Prime Off-Campus series. I really hope it's good. Let me know if you've seen it, if you're interested in popular media, if you like romance. What do you think? Do you kind of agree with my placement in, the current pop culture pantheon? Do you think it's going to compare favorably or unfavorably to the other main properties that we have? Probably Bridgerton and Heated Rivalry, I would say, or would you class it in totally different genres? And if so, why? Tell me. I have a lot of feelings about this. I have a lot of thoughts, as you can tell, but most of all, I want it to do well. I hope it's good. I hope it's fun. I hope it's enjoyable. I hope it's beautiful to look at. I hope it's well acted. I hope it's hot. And if it's not, I'll be disappointed, but I am choosing to be cautiously optimistic. Let me know though. I'm curious to hear from other people about this, and let's check back in a month, shall we?